Cheney, Rumsfeld and Bush, who introduced waterboarding and torture in the wake of their fake hyperbolized 9/11, false flag incident, as I've explained in my book on the history of 9/11, and used it to bring torture back and imprisonment and so on. I mean, even old Feuerbach, who brought the code into Bavaria, would have been shocked. And then they go on to say in the Socialist International Declaration, to support international action in favour of peace, tolerance, dialogue, understanding, and cooperation among peoples. Like, who can't be for this, Again, it goes on to say, to abstain from using military force to gain power or to lead a foreign policy beyond the framework authorised by the relevant international organisations, i.e. the UN. To strive to eliminate weapons of mass destruction and to facilitate disarmament. 100% agree. To strengthen the role of the UN and regional institutions which work towards achieving peaceful solutions to conflicts. Well, I could have written this stuff. I mean, it's 2003. Have you ever heard of it? Have you ever read it? Is it on the media? Does anyone ever talk about this? No. The media's in the hands of extreme right lunatics that think Brexit is the answer, or Trumpism, and who are anti-socialists, right? So socialism, in their word, has become a dirty word. Oh God, he's a socialist. I'm not a socialist, And and yet if you think about it grammatically, and let me do a Russell here and analyse this philosophically, you see, a socialist is simply somebody that believes in society, that thinks that enlightenment, individually attained, has to be shared mutually, and also has to impact on our economics, our living standards, our equality of opportunity, our education, that society has valid claims on our duties and is a guarantee of our rights. Well, if you oppose that and become sort of it's very interesting. We have a word in English that if somebody is antisocial, they're a bit of a trouble. We have another term, social pathology, or antisocial, is not a good thing to be. Yet we have people that are being brought to power in the right in America through this Republican hijacking, which they've done. Lincoln was a good man, and the early Republicans, some of them were very good. But no, it's been hijacked by these extreme right forces. I was watching Michael Moore's film on capitalism. I do recommend people to watch it. It's a great documentary. And it's shocking. It was made some time ago, and he's interviewing people whose homes have been foreclosed. I mean, he was brought up as a Catholic in Flint, in Michigan, and it's shocking what's happened to his America. He goes back to Flint and sees people that are living on the streets, The factories have all been shut down because of capitalism. Because people put the money system and profit ahead of people. So that is anti-social ideology, and it's anti-human. So socialism is a humanism, as Sartre pointed out, great French socialist. And whereas to be against society is to be pathological, is to be antisocial. But unfortunately, they've captured the media. They're trying to capture the internet, but not succeeding. And they've tried to capture Facebook by weaponizing it and using it as a propaganda tool. But again, I think they're not going to succeed. But it's a race to the finish, guys. So what I'm doing in this book of peace declarations is giving you the intellectual tools to be able to out-argue the antisocial psychopaths that are among us, who believe in nothing, care about nothing, love nothing, apart from their own egos and their own, snippets of extreme conspiracy theory that they cobble together, in which everybody is evil, basically. It's a sort of dark Gnostic vision of, and it leads to some very strange things like Trump is the light warrior against evil. Well, that is a complete inversion of the facts. If you actually Go and do a history degree, go and study for 30 years. You can see through that. These are conspiracy things that are being fed to people through the internet to make black white. But anyway, you know, read my books and study for 30 years, you'll know what I'm saying is true. But, you know, I suspend judgment on, I don't know, different people all at different phases of the spiritual and intellectual journey we have to take to get out of this crisis as a planet. Meanwhile, on another front, I'm still trying to get clarity over what caused the coronavirus outbreak, and I've asked various authorities to be involved, and I'm still working on that. Then we come to another declaration which I've given, which is interesting again, and this is by the Church of England. And since it's Orthodox Pentecost, let's go back to see what the Church is up to. And what they've done is they've issued the Anglican Declaration of 2015 on climate change. I found the text, it's not really well known, but I knew of it because I worked a lot in the interfaith community in London. And I've been to Lambeth Palace, which is the headquarters of the Archbishop of Canterbury, just across the river from Parliament. It's a great place with a great library if you're a scholar like me. And yeah, they issued this declaration, which is great on green issues, and it was an interfaith thing. So the Sikhs, the Hindus, the Zoroastrians, the Jews of Britain all signed it, along with all the different Christian denominations. Welby probably set up a team to put it all together. And they want to address the problems of climate change. They want to, quote, develop the spiritual and theological resources that will strengthen us individually and together in our care of the earth, each other, and future generations. They want to encourage and pray for those engaged in the intellectual, economic, political, and spiritual effort needed to address this crisis. They want to work with our communities and partners in the UK and internationally to mitigate the effects of climate change on the poorest and most vulnerable communities in the world. And so on and so on. I mean, it's lovely, I love it, it's great, but there's a huge lacuna in this text, and I make this point in my footnotes of it. It never mentions the word peace once. Like, what? You see, the fact is, as anyone who's done their homework knows, the single greatest contributor to climate change on the planet is the combined military forces of the planet. This is using the most fuel, burning the most fuel on the planet. The combined navies, armies and air forces of the world that are always on exercise somewhere are burning up more fuel than any other resource collectively in aggregate. Also, the production of weapons, again, burns up huge amounts of resources and energy and precious damage caused to the environment. And then in the, you know, whenever they're deployed, wars happen, they're happening all the time. Again, vast damage to the environment, let alone people and our bodies, you know, being blown to smithereens. So the single most important thing we can do to prevent climate change and environmental disaster is to work for peace and get a nuclear disarmament and chemical and biological disarmament treaty in place for universal and complete disarmament, and to descale the militarization of the planet. Now, that's not in the interests of the people that run the military-industrial complex, as Bertrand Russell pointed out, even in 1914 when he wrote his amazing letter. And he worked tirelessly the rest of his life for peace, as I've done. But, so, we're up against the same forces. It's ridiculous. At least they don't stick me in prison now. Although there are many of my brothers and sisters in prison for saying the kinds of things I'm saying now. I have the beauty and liberty of living in France, in the European Union, and in you know, the intellectual freedom to actually think and speak out. So, my dear old Anglican friends, I used to be on the Anglican Pacifist Council, Anglican Pacifist Fellowship Council, and I think on behalf of that body, we think you ought to have put peace into this declaration, Mr. Welby, because as I say, peace and green issues are indissolubly interlinked. And by not mentioning it, it's like giving the nudge, nudge, wink, wink, carry on with your military-industrial machinery of death, folks, that's fine, nuclear weapons, yeah, the whole works, we're with you. No, we're not. As Christians, I don't care if you're Anglican or Orthodox or Quaker or Gnostic or Catholic, we should be collectively utterly opposed to the militarization of our planet. Christ never said, I've come to make everybody, a slave in the military-industrial machine. He was killed by it. The soldiers nailed him to a cross, not the peace activists. They were trying to get him off the cross, So let's make sure we know where we stand on these issues. And so, I'd like a new declaration, please, from the Anglican Federation worldwide, linking green issues to peace issues. We have a duty to show the way, I think. Right, so then, if we go back to this Book of Peace Declarations, I think is really important. I mean, I've been impressed by the quality of the things that are there, and lament the fact that they're not really available. So few people know of these things. And there's been no single publication where you can get them all before. I've done something quite important here, I think. One of the things I've done, and I think is really interesting, is I've discovered a whole bunch of things dealing with nuclear weapons, which I vaguely knew, but I hadn't really appreciated their significance before, and I apologise to my colleagues. So the Treaty of Tlatelolco in Mexico abolished nuclear weapons in the whole of Latin America, south of Mexico and further south. All the nations of Latin America have signed up to this treaty, which says they will never develop, stockpile or use or permit on their territory nuclear weapons. Did you know that? I mean, I fancy we should be singing this out with our tequila and playing the guitar and celebrating. Latin America has gone non-nuclear, and I would love North America to join them. It was a visionary treaty. It had a whole diplomacy behind it of negotiating it and getting it agreed. It was Mexico that largely led it, which is amazing. Yeah, that's the Mexico Trump hates and wants to build a wall about, right? I mean, for God's sake, the man is brain dead. They should be learning from Mexico and the Latin American nations and going the non-nuclear route. I would love to live in a world where within 10 years, both the USA and Canada sign this Treaty of Tlatelolco. That, I think, is the way to start getting a non-nuclear world. Okay, then it gets better, because what I've discovered is there's a similar treaty that was signed for the South Pacific, the Treaty of Rarotonga in 1985, and a huge chunk of the South Pacific, all the little islands there, and New Zealand, have all signed this treaty saying they're never going to have nuclear weapons on their territory and soil, which is deeply symbolic, because that's where a lot of them were tested. A lot of these little island states, the Marshall Islands and stuff. Well, now they're saying no, that's it, no more nuclear weapons. Also, a treaty was signed in 1995 for the whole of Southeast Asia. Now this is Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Philippines, Thailand, Burma, and all the other countries, saying we're not going to have nuclear weapons either. And this was the Nuclear Weapons-Free Southeast Asia Treaty of Bangkok, 1995. Now, I hadn't realised they'd got their act together so far. This is amazing. I put the treaty in. And then it gets better, because the next year, 96, the Treaty of Palindaba, the entire continent of Africa swore to go non-nuclear. Every African country said, we will never have nuclear weapons. It was hosted by South Africa. Of course, this is after Mandela, and it's in the era of, Rainbow South Africa pioneering peace. And so the whole African continent made this firm declaration to non-nuclear weapon development. It doesn't mean they can't have nuclear power, they can have that, but just not nuclear weapons. Well, I didn't know that, did you? The whole of Africa? I think it's incredible. And not only that, but many of the islands around Africa also have signed. So Mauritius, a lovely island off Madagascar, many Africans live there and people from India and so on. It's a Commonwealth country. They've also signed this treaty. No nuclear weapons, thank you, on Mauritius soil. And then it gets better. Central Asia, the whole of Central Asia has signed the Nuclear Weapons Free Treaty of Central Asia in 2006. And this is countries like Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, all the former Soviet republics, which are now independent Central Asian countries. They're all mostly in the Shanghai Cooperation Council I mentioned. But they've also signed this non-nuclear treaty. So they're saying, Central Asia, we don't want nuclear weapons here, thank you very much. Well, bless them. This is really good news that I'm sharing, because my mother, who was an anti-nuclear weapons campaigner for 40 years, and she's the one that pointed Bertrand Russell out to me, she would be really delighted to know all this stuff. And then lastly, dear old Mongolia, one little, huge country actually, has also said unilaterally, we're going the non-nuclear weapons route. We're not going to permit nuclear weapons on our territory. They're not going to happen, And I find that quite symbolic, because Mongolia was the greatest seat of an empire the world had ever known, stretching from Japan all the way to Western Europe. And they've said no, nuclear weapons not happening. A question mark, it's interesting, researching the politics of all this. You see, I think Iran, and there's all this trouble been going on about the Iran nuclear weapons treaty, they're saying, we don't want nuclear weapons, we refuse to have them, we're not going to develop them, we're a Muslim country and it's against Islam. But nobody believes them. America, still has been doing this mad propaganda with Trump, and Netanyahu, who's a psychopathic anti-Iranian, has been constantly trying to egg them into making mistakes so he can go to war against Iran. And because Israel has nuclear weapons, they can destroy it, I mean, these people are psychopaths. These are the guys Bertrand Russell pointed out as being the elites who are engineering war against the interests of us, the people. So what I'm saying to my brothers and sisters in Iran, I have Iranian friends, I have a deep, deep love of Iranian philosophy. I've studied Shiism and Zoroastrianism and the whole Iranian spiritual history since first reading Herodotus years ago, doing ancient history. And Iran is a moral and spiritually important power. It should go the Mongolia route. It should study this treaty of unilateral renunciation of nuclear weapons done by Mongolia, and it should copy the text and present it to the UN as a fait accompli. The UN can't block that. They're supposed to encourage nations to go non-nuclear. Now, if Iran did that and it was passed by the General Assembly of the UN, I think it would just be totally in conformity with Iran's declared policy of non-nuclear weapons. It would flag to the world system that, hey guys, this is official, we're not going for nuclear weapons. And it would then take any possible reason from the machinations of the American press, the right-wing nutters that think it's cool to have policemen sticking their necks on black guys, saying they can't breathe. Well, America has been doing that, as it were, on the whole of Iran, sticking their knee on its neck, even though Iran can't breathe, with sanctions, with cruelty, with diplomatic nightmare behaviour. And so I think what Iran should do in response is just say, okay, we're an ancient culture, we are very sophisticated, we see where you're coming from, America, we've got your drift now, we know you're the kind of guys that do that. Well, we're going to go the Mongolia route and unilaterally declare that they're a non-nuclear weapons power. So I just put that out there, and I strongly think that. The alternative would be for them to join the Central Asian non-nuclear weapons treaty, which they could as a Central Asian power. And again, the UN officially is supposed to be encouraging non-nuclear regional developments. So, but I think first it should be the Mongolian route would be advisable. Right, so then we have another wonderful treaty, which I think is very important, which is the Parliamentary Assembly at the UN, I've put in. The idea here is that the UN should develop a parliamentary assembly. If you believe in democracy, if you believe in speaking, not bombing, parlamento means to speak. The first parliament in Britain was based on the French word to speak, parler. So let's do parler instead of, bombing and killing. And nowadays it's secret cover disinformation warfare that's done by cyber ops and psychological operative groups and so on. Well, no, none of that, please. Let's have parler. Let's have a parliament in the UN. It could be in New York, or I think it should be in Geneva to balance. Geneva's the other great UN capital of the world. New York's got the UN, and the General Assembly meets there, the Security Council. Fine. Let the Parliament meet in Geneva. I'm sure they can find a building big enough, and each nation would send, however many MPs, and it would gradually develop an esprit de corps like the Strasbourg Parliament of the European Union, and they would do good things. I can't see anything wrong with that, and so I support the declaration which is calling for this, and it's gathering steam. Many thousands of intellectuals and existing parliamentarians, politicians of all different persuasions, but moderate Democrat types, not sort of fanatical Steve Bannon, let's seize Parliament types, not fascists, right? They won't want parliamentary democracy at the UN. And I think also the anti-UN stuff you see on all these memes coming through, that's all just propaganda paid for by Cambridge Analytica type spin-off groups that are trying to brainwash people that the UN is evil. Please guys, study the history. Why was the UN set up? Study the modern history of the last 500 years as I've done, and you'll know that it's doing, what it can for light. And I've done prayers in the spiritual meditation room at the UN headquarters in New York, set up by Dag Hammarskjöld, who was Secretary General, a great man. We need more of that kind of ethic of spirituality in the UN. And by having a parliamentary assembly there, it would help, I think. Now I want to come on to Romain Rolland. I did promise, and I like to keep my promises. His work is absolutely incredible. If you don't know of this guy, he lived in France here, and he was an intellectual, a writer. He was a musicologist. He did write learned books on the history of music, and he became professor at the Sorbonne in music history and philosophy. He was a novelist. He wrote very famous novels, and he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1915. And he was utterly appalled and hated the war. He was like E.D. Morel and Bertrand Russell in England. He just thought that the idea of World War I was completely ridiculous. We shared a common civilization, whether we're German or Belgian or Dutch or English or Scottish or Welsh or Irish or Austrian or Hungarian. We're all Europeans, and so World War I was a complete nightmare. The only people that benefited were the elites running the military-industrial complex. Even the Kaiser tried to stop it. I know there was the English press vilified the Kaiser, but he actually did try to stop it at the last minute. And a book by a couple of Scottish historians have documented pretty conclusively that he was tricked into the war by the financial interests of the City of London that were the only people that thought they'd benefit from it. So there's still, stuff to be discovered about this. Anyway, Romain Rolland, after the war, he published an incredible text, a peace declaration, which I've given here in full, which I've never seen anywhere in any kind of normal publication. And it's called the Declaration of Independence of the Mind. it's such a visionary thing. And this guy, it's like he was foreseeing the work I'm doing with the World Intellectual Forum and the work we're doing. Because the World Intellectual Forum is like a reincarnation of this project that he was doing. Let me read out the text. This is 1919. Workers of the mind, comrades scattered throughout the world, separated for 5 years by armies, censorship, and the hatred of nations at war. We address an appeal to you at this hour when barriers are falling and frontiers are reopening, to revive our fraternal union, but as a new, more secure and reliable union than that which previously existed. The war threw our ranks into confusion. The majority of intellectuals put their science, their art, their reason at the service of governments. We wish to accuse no one, to direct no reproach. We know the weakness of individual souls and the elemental force of great collective currents. The latter has swept aside the former in an instant, for nothing has been prepared to help in the work of resistance. Let this experience at least help us for the future. And let us first of all acknowledge the disasters brought about by the almost total abdication of the intelligence of the world and its voluntary enslavement to unchained forces. Thinkers and artists have added an incalculable sum of poisonous hatred to the plague that devours Europe's flesh and spirit. They sought, in the arsenal of their knowledge, their memory, their imagination, old and new reasons, historical reasons, scientific, logical and poetic reasons, to hate. They worked to destroy comprehension and love between men. And thus they have disfigured, debased, lowered, degraded thought, of which they were the representatives. They made thought the instrument of passions, and without knowing it perhaps, of the selfish interests of a political or social clan, a state, a country or a class. At present, out of this savage battle, from which all the involved countries, victorious or vanquished, emerge battered, ruined, and in the bottom of their heart, although they may not admit it, ashamed and humiliated by their excessive madness, thought, compromised with them in their struggle, emerges with them fallen. Stand up. Let us disentangle the mind from its compromises, its humiliating alliances, its hidden bondage. The mind is the slave of no one. It is we who are the servants of the mind. We have no other master. We exist to uphold, to defend its light, to rally around it all misguided men. Our duty is to maintain a fixed point, to point to the polar star in the midst of the swirling passions in the night. Among these passions of pride and mutual destruction, we make no choices. We reject them all. We honour truth alone, free, frontierless, limitless, without prejudices of nations or castes. Assuredly, we are not uninterested in humanity, for it is for humanity that we work, but for it as a whole. We do not know peoples, we know the people, unique, universal. The people that suffers, that struggles, that fails, and that constantly rises to its feet again, and that always marches along a rough road, drenched in its blood. The people of all men and women, all equally our brothers and sisters. And it is in order that they may, like us, become conscious of this fraternity, that we raise above their blind conflicts the arch of alliance, the free mind, one and manifold, eternal. Well, I just have to say to Romain Rolland's spirit, he's no longer with us, that this is a superb text. The original was written in French, and you can imagine it in French. It would be even more grandiose and magnificent. Rolland was an extraordinary man, having written this, and he then set up a sort of one-man intellectuals of the world unite for peace type movement. And that's why I've given the text in full. In 1931, he was in Switzerland. Gandhi, who came to Britain for the discussions over the future of India, he lived at Kingsley Hall, where I worked for several years in the East End of London, and I used to commune with Gandhi, in the ashram there. Well, Gandhi went all the way to Switzerland to meet this guy, Romain Rolland, and they spent 4 days chatting, and I'm sure that Rolland read that text out to him. I don't think Gandhi spoke French, but I suspect Rolland could speak, enough English. What a great meeting that would have been. So that declaration is here. There's also, there's a lot more I could go on, but I'm going to be, economical here, because what I'm trying to do, as you gathered with my Institute of Peace Studies and Philosophy, and more latterly my work with the World Intellectual Forum, is to revive that spirit that Romain talks about, that Gandhi spoke about. So we should be working for universal wisdom and enlightenment for humanity, which can only be achieved through peace and non-violence. This is why I've supported the Jains in their work for encouraging peace and non-violence and peace education around the planet. So anyway, you'll find lots of exciting goodies in here. And the book's not published, but it will be by the solstice. But the first 3 volumes are published, and you can get them. They're full of extraordinary stuff I don't have time to go into. What I've done is I've given the text of the whole declaration. These things are not in copyright, they're public documents. And then I've written my own interpretation comments and given the historical background in the footnotes. So, you get a double take on them. Right, so I just want to say that in the carrying on with my research, obviously, into Chris Wylie's book on the way that data has been weaponized, the way that Facebook was hijacked or attempted to be. I think it's very important we don't let these right-wing nutters succeed, and that we say, no, the social media is social. They're trying to turn it into an anti-social media where lies and vicious racial hatreds can be stirred up. No. The social media is an expression of that one mind that Romain Rolland invokes, which in Gandhian philosophy is Brahma. It's the one mind the Upanishads talk about. All our separate intellects are emanations of that one cosmic mind. Therefore, we need not be at war with anyone. This is, why the Druids of the world constantly have invoked peace, and why the Brahmins likewise. Because the Brahmin is someone that's in touch with Brahma. And the same with the Druids were in touch with Dharma, which is the etymologically similar root to the word Druid. The oak tree is the symbol of that. And so when it says the Druids were the knowers of the oak, no, they're the knowers of Dharma. I just want to acknowledge that my dear friend Philip Cargon, the chief of OBOD, has stepped down and handed over to Ema, an Irish Druidess, and I wish her well. The Druid orders, change leaves like the oaks, but they carry